Dance by the water beneath the Mexican sky. Drink some margaritas by a string of blue lights. Listen to the mariachi play at midnight. Are you with me? Are you with me?
Distinguished scientist in the Chinese academia, right? So with this introduction, this presentation, I would like now to give the clue to Fernando. So thank you very much and welcome to our institute. And I hope you enjoy very much his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Javier. Good morning, everyone, and thanks a lot, first of all, Javier, for the very nice introduction and for the invitation. It's really my pleasure to be here today because this is my third time in Malaga. The first time I came, I was a teenager. I came on holiday with my parents, and I don't, well, of course, I keep some memories. Then I just came for another seminar in a bank. That was something we can talk about it later. And then this is my third time in the city, my first time in the institute, so it's really my pleasure to be here. And I have to say that it was a pure coincidence that when Javier told me that, no, when we introduce the speakers with some music, and for you, I have selected rain, which I say, well, yeah, of course, you know, for a dryland ecologist like myself, it's a nice way of introduce our work. And also, it's also a nice coincidence because the name of my daughter is Lluvia, which, as you know, is rain in English. So, as he mentioned, I recently moved to KAUST, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia. And for my seminar today, I'm not going to talk about our research, you know, because when Javier invited me, I proposed several potential talks. And I suggested the talk I'm going to give today, which is a quite broad talk, which I think can be appealing to a broader audience that may or may not be interested in the specifics of the work we do in our lab. I will introduce a couple of examples of the work we have done, but it's going to be a broad topic that hopefully will be of your interest. And in the seminar today, and I really hope that when you get out of the room, you will get a stronger appreciation about the importance of drylands. We are living in a dryland environment, all of you here in Malaga too. So, you know, I don't need to explain too much why they are important, but what the key message that I hope that I will be able to transmit to you is that if we want to achieve the sustainability of our planet, achieve the sustainable development goals, or at least trying to live in a more sustainable way, it will not happen if we don't take care about drylands and about the main environmental issues we face in drylands worldwide. So why we need to focus or pay attention to drylands? For multiple reasons, and I will just explain a few of them. First, because of their extent, you know, they cover more than 40% of the terrestrial surface, depending on the classification of aridity you use, and the study you look at, the numbers vary between 41% and 45%, and they are increasing. They are increasing because of climate change. And one of the main, there are like different ways of defining drylands, but the most accepted way is that is based on the concept of aridity. I think all of you are familiar with aridity. There are multiple ways of measuring it, but the most standard way is using what we call the aridity index, which is a very simple metric, which is precipitation divided by potential evapotranspiration, right? The lower the precipitation versus the evaporative demand of the atmosphere, the evapotranspiration, or you work with plants, so you know what I'm talking about with evapotranspiration, the higher the aridity. So in this classification that was put forward by the United Nations, sorry, in this index and classification of drylands versus non-drylands, drylands are all areas with an aridity index below 0.65. So in this case, using this metric, the lower the value of this aridity index, the higher the aridity, right? So they cover, you know, a very big chunk, I'm sorry for the expression, for the terrestrial surface, and are fundamental also from the socioeconomical point of view. for multiple reasons, because they host over 40% of the global population, and most of the developing countries in the world are located in areas with a dryland environment. So that's also fundamental for many issues, and some of them I will comment below. So when the general public, let's say, I come from a town in Alicante, right, which is a dryland area, 300 millimeters of rain. When I talk about my neighbors, oh, Fernando, what do you do? No, I work on biodiversity. Oh, the plants, animals, that's great. I wish I could be, in a high biodiversity place. And I tell, well, what is a high biodiversity place? No, the Amazon, these beautiful, Swiss prairies full of flowers. And when talking about drylands, even the people living in dryland environments, they have been seen for many years as barren lands, right? As areas very harsh, very little vegetation, areas of very little value, right? And of course, this is not true. As a biologist myself, drylands are fascinating, environments for studying almost any ecological, biological process you can imagine. And this idea of areas of low value, for instance, from the biodiversity perspective, is really grown. It's completely grown. Not only, for instance, I like to put an example. I come from Alicante. In the province of Alicante, just in Alicante, we have more plant species than in the whole United Kingdom, right? The United Kingdom, which is like the mecca of naturalists for centuries, right? There are less plant species than in the province of Alicante. And that's a nice example of how diverse dryland environments are, and they also have a unique biodiversity. They have a unique biodiversity, and it's pretty amazing. And this is one of the things that we have been trying to do in our lab over the years, is try to put in value, not only to emphasize the high biodiversity of drylands, but also their ecological importance, their role in delivering multiple ecosystem functions and services. But also, drylands are fundamental for us. You all work on food production. Drylands are fundamental for food production. Some of the main food production areas in the world are in dryland environments. And I don't need to put many examples. You know them better than me. We can talk about Almeria, we can talk about the Salad Bowl in California, we can talk about many regions in Australia. Some of the main food production areas are located in dryland environments. If we talk about livestock, they are even more important, because it's estimated that over 50% of the global livestock is raised in dryland areas, particularly when we are talking about extensive livestock. And some of the areas in the world with most animals, for instance, like free-ranging animals, like Patagonia, Mongolia, are located in dryland environments. So they are fundamental for food production. And they are also fundamental for very important topic, for instance, like migration and human movements and human population dynamics. Some of the most fastest growing, if we look at the population in the world, it's still increasing in a linear way, but it's not because of us, and other areas of the world where population are either flat or declining. It's because mostly the growth in Africa, and particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, that still has the fastest population growth rate on the planet. And that means that these areas that are mostly dryland areas are some of the most important source areas of migrants, of people moving around. So, and I don't need to explain why this is very important, right? And from the social, economical, and environmental point of view. So let's say if we if we agree that this is fundamental, we need to focus on dryland just for these, among other reasons, for this very same reason. And drylands are very important today, but they are going to be even more important tomorrow because of climate change. As we know, with climate change, the climate is changing, the planet is warming, the rainfall patterns are changing, but no matter what happens with rainfall, because of the warming, temperature is increasing. So aridity, particularly if we measure it with the aridity index, is increasing in many parts of the world. So it's estimated, and of course there is some debate about whether the extent of increase, and depending on the models we use and the forecast and so on, but it's estimated that by the end of this century, the global extent of drylands may increase between 11 and 23%. And areas that are drylands today, like Malaga, will be drier in the future, and areas that are not drylands today, like many parts of Germany, will be drylands by the end of the century. So really drylands, are going to be more important in the future, even if they are very important today. You all know this, I don't need to explain much, right? The Sustainable Development Goals, these 17 objectives put forward by United Nations and signed by 197 countries, if I remember correctly, that should guide, the way that countries, societies, companies, individuals operate in order to achieve a sustainable development of the whole planet, right? I'm not going to enter into many details. I assume that most of you will be familiar with this. But what I would like now to emphasize are some of the main challenges that we have at the moment to achieve these sustainable development goals in drylands and in the planet, in the whole planet. Because as I mentioned, and I hope that I will be able to transmit this, there will be no achievement of sustainable development goals if these goals are not achieved in drylands. Okay, so one of the main challenges we have is development and poverty. As I mentioned before, most of the developing countries in the world are located in a dryland environment. And no matter of which metric we look at, for instance, this is a histogram of a human development index combining different metrics of life expectancy, GDP, and so on. And the values, if you look in drylands versus non-drylands countries, at the country level, values are higher in non-dryland countries. It's estimated that over 1 billion people rely on natural resources for their livelihoods in drylands. So that means that all these people rely on the livestock they can raise and on the food they can produce, which, as you can imagine, is also strongly dependent on the climate and the soil conditions of the places where they live. And of course, no matter at which human development index or metrics you look at, for instance, this is just hunger for a given year, 2016. If you look at the places where this hunger is alarming or extremely alarming, most of them, not all of them, but most of them are located in dryland environments. So, and I'm not saying anything new, we all know that this is a very, very important problem, and it's a main challenge we have for achieving sustainable development goals, particularly those related to poverty eradication and human well-being. Another very important challenge, very important issue, and you all are very familiar with this, water use, and in particular water use by agriculture. Because this is, for instance, at the country level, this is 2015, but still today is even if you will get the most recent data, look pretty much the same. This is water use by agriculture worldwide at the country level. And you see how it's possible that some of the countries that most water use in agriculture are located in drylands, which are I haven't talked too much, but drylands, one of the characteristics is that there is not much water, right? So how is that possible? Well, you know very well, because of the use of groundwater, right? This is what has made the miracle, right, of growing, having many dryland areas to be like key food production areas, like the greenhouses in Almeria, because of their reliance on groundwater. What is the main consequence, or one of the main consequences of this extensive use of water for agriculture is the depletion, contamination, salinization of aquifers. This is a global map of the status of aquifers all over the world. If you look at the green, good status, red, very bad status, if you look at areas with groundwater, with aquifers in bad or very bad status, almost in all cases are located in dryland areas, right? So this is really a main challenge, because clearly the way we are growing food in many dryland areas based on irrigation is clearly unsustainable, and it's a main challenge. It's a main challenge we have. And of course, we could put many examples. I just want to highlight one of them in the Arabian Peninsula. This is from a study we published a few years ago, where it's pretty amazing when you go and look at the satellite, how you can see in the middle of the desert these green circles, which is, they grow, maize, wheat, and many other things, and all this agriculture is based in the middle of the desert by use groundwater. And you can see how far, and this is an area where there are like 2 aquifer boundaries, so they start irrigating, and when the aquifer is depleted, they move. The aquifer is depleted, they move. But what is the main problem? That this water is fossil water. These aquifers were replenished a few thousand years ago when the climate was more wet, and there is no further replenishment. Once you use it, this water is gone. So we talk all the time about fossil fuel, but we don't talk about fossil water. Aquifers in many dryland areas are really fossil water, so we need to use it very wisely. And this is a main challenge. Another very important challenge, which is not exclusive of drylands, but in drylands is particularly important because of what we mentioned before, is that in order to produce food, we need to use a lot of water, which is food waste. This is a key problem that is often under the radar, but should be on top of the table on any debate, on any environmental debate, and any debate, discussion on food production, which is food waste. And if you look at the numbers, are really, really struggling and very sad too, because it's estimated that more than 30% of the food, in global terms, if you look at the statistics of the FAO and other organisms, it's estimated that more than 30% of the food we produce is wasted. Either on farm, because, and as I will put an example now, many times we produce more than the market can absorb, and you know this very well. So as a consequence, farmers throw away the food because it's not worth for them selling it because there is no market for that food. Then there is also lots of food that is waste at home, lots of food that is waste in restaurants during distribution, so on, and that are discarded for cosmetic reasons, and so on and so forth. And the environmental impact of this is huge. It's really huge. If you go at the global scale, so the numbers, it's estimated, that we are throwing away more than 1 billion tons of food, that it cost an estimated cost between $700 billion and $1 trillion per year. You keep the numbers, these numbers, up to $1 trillion, is wasted in the food we are wasting. And this is a paradox because at the same time, over 100 million people are going to bed hungry. So, it's estimated that if just 1/4 of the food we are throwing away could be safe, we could end hunger in the world. Of course, this is much more easy to say than to do in practice. But keep in mind that, and you work on agricultural production, what is the mantra for agricultural production? We need to produce more because we need to feed more people, right? But at the same time, this has, and of course, if we talk about the climate change, agriculture in general is one of the main producer, right, of greenhouse gases. It's estimated that the food we waste produce over 3.3 gigatons of CO2, so that's a huge amount. So we have this paradox, right? We need to produce more food, and at the same time we are throwing away over 30% of that food. So maybe we should think, if we want to be more sustainable, in ways to reduce the amount of food we waste, and this will reduce the need for producing more food. And we can come back to this later. I'm going to put another example because sometimes these big numbers, people don't see them very, very near, or, oh, well, but this is in other countries. But this is an example from Almería, another from a study led by Jaime Martínez Valderrama. He's now a tenure scientist at CSIC in Almería. And we use estimated using official statistics. That's very interesting. In Spain, as you know, farmers get subsidized to destroy part of the crop in situ when the prices go down. As is one of these mechanisms to protect the price for farmers. And why this happens? It happens because we produce, as I mentioned before, during many times over the year, we produce more food, particularly tomatoes, or in these very high productive areas in the greenhouses, we produce more tomatoes, zucchini, cucumbers that the market can absorb. So the European Union pays up to 5% of the crop, of the estimated crop to avoid the prices going down. So it's interesting. There is a very detailed, if you go to the official statistics of the minister, there is a very detailed statistics about all the crops that are being destroyed in situ, right? In order to get these subsidies. So we took these official statistics and then we estimated, for the amount of food thrown away, how much water was used, how much fertilizer was wasted, and how much CO2 was released to the atmosphere using, standardized tables and from previous studies. So, we use focusing in Almeria for 5 main greenhouse crops: tomato, pepper, zucchini, cucumber, and eggplant. We estimated that use in 1 year, in this case 2019, the food we discarded on the farm, right? Just without even food that is good for being eaten, but that didn't even enter the commercial market. We were wasting over 300,000 meters of water, more than 136 tons of fertilizers, and we released more than 7,500 tons of CO2. And I come from Alicante, and as you know, water is a very sensitive issue, water in agriculture. And for instance, the Tagus Segura transfer, is a very hot political and social issue. And the lemma, I don't know in the English word, right? This saying, agua para todos, no? Water for all. So we are asking more water, and at the same time, we are throwing away 300,000 meters in a single year, right? But this is just the tip of the iceberg for 2 reasons: because this cascade across all crops, and because the amount of food declared is just a very tiny fraction of the amount of food that is really thrown away. This is what they declare because it's what they will get subsidized. But the amount of the real amount of food that is thrown away is much higher. For instance, we did another estimate, and this is, I had one day a discussion with a journalist in El País. We were talking, this was last year, remember last year, by this time, drought, we were really, particularly in Catalonia and other parts of Spain, here in Malaga too, right, was on every day, in the news every day, right? Unfortunately, this year we had, this is one of the problems with drought. We quickly forget. We had a rainy year this year, we forget that last year we were under very, very severe drought. Remember that there was that discussion that bringing water to Barcelona by boat, which is a crazy, a very expensive solution. So, I got a call from this journalist in El País, and, Fernando, we want to release, some news items about drought, the problematic and so on. And I say, you should focus on this, because most people don't even know about this. Most people don't even know that we are throwing away so much food. And if we are throwing away food, we are throwing away water, because, all these crops are irrigated. So again, and they did a great job with this infography is directly from the newspaper. So we provided them the data, we did the estimations, and they did the news and this infography, which is very nice. So using for all crops and official statistics, we estimated that, between 2018 and 2023, on average per year, is more than 31 million of cubic meters are thrown away. And of course, you can then divide in, how much corresponds to irrigation, water pollution, and rainfall. But what is really struggling is that every of these dots, correspond to the water you can transport in a boat. So how many, hundreds of thousands of boats you can, you could save, and we are talking about millions and millions and millions of euros if we avoid wasting food. Throwing away. This is, for instance, last year in Alicante was very problematic with the lemons. As you know, I don't know if some of you work with lemons, you know that now we have planted so many lemons that the market cannot even absorb. And for instance, last year in Alicante, more than 100,000, I think it was more than 100,000 tons of lemons were discarded on farm because, there were no market for them. So this is food waste is a huge problem worldwide, but it's a particularly important problem in drylands. Of course, you may have heard for sure about desertification or land degradation, which is something also that we work a lot on. And when we are talking about land degradation, we are talking about the that we degrade the land so it doesn't keep the capacity to sustain life and to provide the services we need. We are talking about climate regulation, we are talking about food production, we are talking about erosion control, and so on and so forth. So why land is degraded, desertified? Well, because of the way we manage, when cultivating land in a very intensive way, when using overgrazes, when we graze, this is, for instance, is a big problem in Saudi Arabia. There are too many, far away, too many more camels that the natural system really can support, or when we exploit, the water resources in an unsustainable way. This is, for instance, is an example of desertification. People get upset, and at the beginning they don't understand very well. But this type of very intensive agriculture based on irrigation is an example of desertification. Why? Because after you deplete all the aquifers, there is gone. The resource that could support human development, a fundamental resource for natural vegetation ecosystems, is gone. So this is an example of desertification. And if you look at the numbers, that are huge, and of course another cause of desertification is soil erosion, mostly driven by mismanagement. And as you know, this is a big problem in many areas of Spain, where when we grow crops like trees, almonds, olives, and so on, we keep the soil clear of vegetation. And I don't need to explain what happens when we have a very intense rainfall, right? That the soil is gone, and once the soil is gone, the capacity of the land to grow these plants is gone, right? And we are talking, forming soil is a process that takes hundreds of years. Losing the soil may take 1 hour. If you remember the images of the last Dana in Valencia, how was the color of the water moving around? Was brown. Why? Because of the erosion in the cabecera, in the top of the watershed, right? In the mountains, all this erosion, all these sediments are washed away. And when you see all these sediments wash away, it's soil, it's carbon, it's nutrients, you are losing something that you cannot recover at the human scale. Except, you put a lot of input, you bring soil from other parts, you start using fertilizers and so on. So if you look at the numbers at the global scale, it's estimated that more than 1 billion people are at risk of this loss of productivity because of land degradation and desertification. Remember that I mentioned before that there is over 1 billion people that directly rely on what the land produces for their livelihood, right? It's not like us, we open the tap, we get water, we go to the supermarket and get food. But if the food we eat depends on the fertility of the soil and on the amount of rainfall we get, the situation will be much more different, right? And it's estimated that the annual economic losses due to land degradation, maybe more than $10 trillion. This is a number so large that I cannot understand well, but it's very large. So this is a very, very important problem. And for many years, people have believed that, well, desertification, land degradation is a problem of Africa, developing countries, it's not like a really global issue. We should not be worried too much about it. It's like a problem of other countries, right? And it's not the case. This is, for instance, we have estimated using, I'm not going to enter into the details, using the official protocols and the official way of estimating land degradation according to the United Nations. This is a paper we have under review, hopefully, after 4 rounds of review, hopefully will be accepted soon. And it is used to illustrate, how every red dot is a place that shows land degradation, that is really a global phenomenon. And drylands are here in these, dash areas, and you can see lots of land degradation outside drylands. So it's really a global issue that affects everyone in the world. Of course, another very important challenge for everyone, but for drylands in particular, is climate change. And we are already suffering it, right, in cities like Malaga. Those of us that are old enough, you remember 20 years ago, the summer nights were not as bad as the summer nights this year, right? For example, or last year, how many bad nights we had last year compared to how many bad nights we used to have in summer 20 years ago, right? So the planet is warming, and this is affecting particularly dryland areas. For instance, this is an example from Saudi Arabia where temperatures are already quite extreme, But with climate change are becoming super extreme. There will be parts of the country that will not be livable without air conditioning. For instance, in Kaust, where I come from, we are very close to the Red Sea, close to Jeddah. Now the temperatures is starting to become quite hot there, and the minimum temperatures already are in the summer for over 4 months. The temperatures fluctuate between 31, 32 minimum and 38, 39 maximum, with 90% humidity. Of course, you cannot sleep under this condition without air conditioning. But with climate change, we may talk about minimum temperatures of 34, 35, maximum temperatures of 40 plus. In some places can reach up to 50. These are temperatures that from the physiological point of view, we can die of a shock stress, very, very quickly, right? So this is really a main problem. And climate change is also, of course, is interlinked to many problems. We could be speaking about for hours about the impacts of climate change. But for us, and for you in particular, something that we need to be worried about is about the impact of climate change in water availability and what is called water stress. So there has been multiple modeling, exercise to try to forecast, the degree of water stress, across the globe under different climate change scenarios. This is just an example for this SSP2 scenario for 2050. And if you can imagine, if you can see, the areas that will experience high or very high, water stress in the future, virtually all are located in dryland environments, right? And our country, and the south of the country, Malaga, Alicante, and in particular, we will face very high water stress in the future. So this is really a main challenge for, our, development and livability. Okay, so of course we know, I like to say that we as scientists are very good at identifying problems. It's very easy to, oh no, everything is very bad. Oh, this is terrible. We are doing really bad. But of course, we also need to try to provide solutions, or at least, discuss what we can do to try to overcome this situation. We may not be able to solve all these issues, all these issues and challenges, but we really can do a lot of things to make them less worse, as is being forecasted. So for finishing my talk, I would like to discuss with you and present some potential solutions and things that really we need to take care about and to really handle in order to solve this. Of course, the first problem, if you remember, was development and poverty. So I like to say that the most important thing we can do to solve this, or to try to solve it, is to invest on people, and in particular to invest in education, and in particular in the education of women. There is a really huge and growing literature showing that in the developing world, all the indicators, the finance, indicators related to finance, to health, to any, entrepreneurship, everything you look at improves when the education of the woman improves. The education in general and of women in particular. When we empower women and they start to take their own decisions, for instance, regarding key issues like having children, how many child, when, and so on, everything improves. Of course, and this is something when you have a very important role to play, we also need to help the developing world in improving their agricultural production, right? Developing new varieties that, can stand better stress, developing new ways to handle pests, agricultural pests, which, of course, I don't need to explain how important is this. And, of course, we also need to improve governance and reduce inequalities. I'm a biologist, I'm not a social scientist, economist, or politician, so I don't know, I don't have like all I don't have a varita mágica, how is that in English, I cannot get the solutions with a stick. If I could be able to do it, I will not be here. I will be working with the United Nations, right? But it's something that really is very well studied, and there is again a growing lots of evidence suggesting that inequalities as they increase, all the problems increase. So it's important to reduce them. Of course, we need to reduce water use. And we can discuss about this. I'm sure that many of you may not be very happy with some of the things we say, but we cannot continue using water as we are using now. It's clearly not sustainable because the problem is, for instance, I think for instance, the director of the Doñana, the biological station of Doñana, explained it very well last year, right? Again, in the peak of the drought, where people was the discussion, no, preserving nature or, red berry agriculture. And he say, if we continue this way, there will be no nature and there will be no agriculture, right? So it's not that one thing or the other. It's either the two things go hand by hand, or either none of the things will survive in the future, right? So if we want to, if we want that, agriculture and human development go hand by nature, the only way for them to survive, for agricultural and or way of living to survive is to start trying to go hand by nature. And of course, one of the most important things we have to do to reduce water use is to reduce food loss and waste. It's not that it's a crime. I'm from the generation where my mom always say, Fernando, you need to eat all the food in your plate. And at home, we eat all the food in your plate. That means that we only put the food we can eat, right? Of course, there is no point of putting out of food and I cannot eat more, I need to eat more. No, it's put the food that you can eat, right? This is fundamental. We need to reduce food waste. And this can be done at many. We could spend hours about how this can be done. Of course, we need a lot of educational campaigns. For instance, in Saudi Arabia, there is a national program. There is a big problem, for instance, Ramadan. During Ramadan, right? People don't eat during the day, but when the sun sets, they make like a big, it's a big meal, right? And what happens when you go to a buffet? That most of the people eat more, put more food that they can really eat. So as a consequence, a lot of food is wasted. So for instance, in Saudi Arabia, they are putting a lot of effort, trying to, reduce food waste, particularly during Ramadan, which is when this can be, when more food is wasted there. But there are many ways. Of course, we need more education. We need to educate our children and our peers. We need to educate our society. Then we need to avoid food waste and loss at home, at the restaurants. It's very important. We need to change policies. Why, if this, rather than giving subsidies for destroying crop, we give subsidies to those farmers that, avoid losing crops, right? Destroying crops. There are many ways. I know that is not easy, but this should be on top of the agenda. And of course, we need still a lot of research. How to preserve food. I know that there is. It's not my field, but I know we're talking yesterday about ethylene, right? Ethylene, as you know, is. I don't know if some of you will be working on this. On post-harvest, conservation of fruits and so on. And we need, again, to help the developing countries, because most of the food waste in the developing countries is waste at the post-harvest, right? During transportation, during storage, and so on. So there is still a lot of research that need to be done, but this should be on top of the research, political, social, and economical agendas. Of course, we need to preserve biodiversity. I mentioned at the beginning that I didn't present any, that I was not going to talk about our research. But for instance, this has been one of the key topics of our research over the years. Not only to characterize the plants, microbial, animal diversity of drylands all over the world, but also to look at their functional roles. How things like carbon sequestration, soil fertility, water regulation, and so on are affected by organisms. And over the years, we have published a lot on this. No matter if we look at soil microbes, no matter if we look at these beautiful, what we call biocrusts, which are these communities dominated by mosses, lichens, and many other microorganisms living on the top of the soil surface. No matter if you look at plants, no matter if you look at big mammals, like elephants, that you may not believe it, but elephants increase the amount of carbon in the soil. If you have elephants in your system, you have more carbon in your soil. Elephants are fixing carbon more effectively than plants. That's pretty amazing. No matter, what we look at in general, of course, with lots of variation, depending on multiple factors, but those sites with more biodiversity are able to function better to deliver more ecosystem services. So this is fundamental. We need to preserve the existing biodiversity we still have. And this will be like the only thing that I will talk about the research. And of course, and that's something that, we need to do. I'm not saying anything new. We need to decarbonize our lifestyle, right? We need to try to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we are releasing to the atmosphere. And we can do, again, this is a very, very complex and transversal topic. There are many, many actions across all levels that should be applied. But because, that's a topic that is very interesting to me, and we are in a food production-related research center, agriculture has a lot of potential for decarbonizing our way of living. I don't know if you are familiar with this webpage or World in Data. If not, I will really recommend you to dig into it. It's amazing. They have all sorts of data about many environmental and human topics. And they have done some very interesting analysis about how we can reduce the global greenhouse impact of the the food production system. So right now, it's estimated that if we do business as usual, I'm sorry, without glasses I no longer can see. So I cannot see well, I'm getting older. So, it's estimated that if we continue as we are doing now, by the end of the century, more than 1,300 billion tons of CO2 will be released, right? So there are multiple ways we can not only reduce substantially this amount, but even we could make agriculture to make a sink, right? Moving from a huge source to being a sink. And of course, if we, and there are multiple ways we can do that. For instance, developing high yield, and I'm sure many of you are working on this, high yield varieties, we can get a 14% reduction, very important. If we will be able to reduce food waste by half, we're not talking removing completely, this is very difficult, but if we are able to remove food waste by half, we could get over a 30% reduction, Healthy calories, this is very interesting. Right now we are eating a lot of food that is not healthy and has a huge environmental impact. Beef, processed foods, all this junk food, it's not only bad for the planet, it's very bad for our health. Just replacing this type of food can get another 30% reduction. And of course, best farm practices, this is very important, what is called sustainable land management. For instance, no tillage crop or reduced tillage crop, trying to use more organic fertilizers and reduce the number of, because remember, every time we are using chemical fertilizers to produce these fertilizers, as it's a very high energy intensive process. So we are releasing lots of, greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And of course, something very important, which has a huge potential, is moving towards a more plant-based diet. This doesn't mean that, all of us need to be vegetarian, right? But if we reduce the amount of meat, particularly red meat, and increase the amount of plants, and also fish has a lot of potential to address climate change and increase the health of our health, right? The health of the population to our diets. So it's estimated that let's say, if we were able to do all this, we can just fully, offset all these emissions and make agriculture to be a sink. Even if we could reduce, over 50%, half of them, we still will get a more than 50% reduction. So these use some numbers, an example of the power of agriculture, food system, food production to address and mitigate climate change. Of course, we also need to restore degraded lands, right? I mentioned before that land degradation is a main issue, right? And you all know, and here in Spain, in the south of Spain, we have these big afforestation that have been done over the years, right? When talking about land restoration degradation, for instance, in Saudi Arabia now, this is also, it's called the Saudi Green Initiative. There are lots of efforts, ongoing efforts to plant trees and to increase the cover of vegetation, and this is great. But my point is that we need to restore agricultural lands, right? When talking about restoring degraded lands, most people have in mind, planting trees, increasing vegetation in natural or semi-natural areas. But agricultural areas cover more than 40% of terrestrial surface and has a lot of potential for restoration. So it's estimated that if we could increase, 0.4 in soil carbon content by year, we could have huge impact, increase water rotation for more than 37 billion cubic meters, increase the production of main crops substantially, and mitigate a lot of carbon emissions. How can we increase, soil carbon in agricultural soils? One of the most efficient ways is to change the way we crop, reduce the intensity of the way we crop, reduce the amount of fertilizers, using crop covers. We have done, I should have put another slide, I forgot to put it. we have done studies across wheat fields in Europe showing that cover crop, if those areas, in this case it was with wheat and barley, those areas, those fields that have cover crops for most of the year have a much higher soil fertility, biodiversity functionality, and also even higher yields, right? So, when doing tillage, reducing the amount of tillage or practicing no tillage, and when, for instance, harvesting the wheat, leaving all the plant residues in the soil. This not only will contribute to increase the soil carbon, but this is super effective against erosion. It's super effective, For instance, during the Dana that I mentioned before, those fields that have cover crops, that have vegetation in between the trees, really lose a much lower amount of soil than normal fields. And of course, I always get the saying, okay, Fernando, this is very nice. You are an ecologist. You worry about, biodiversity and so on. This is very nice, but we need to produce more food. That's always the same. No, we need to, Of course, I'm not saying that we still will need agricultural intensive, in some areas, but clearly we don't need this degree of agricultural intensity everywhere as is being practiced today. And the answer is the same. Well, if we are throwing away more than 30% of the food, right? At least we can afford, for 30% of the area dedicated to food production to reduce the intensity, right? The key question is how to do it, and this is where we need to put our efforts. But there is also a growing number of evidence that, doing at this less intensive way of farming is producing many more benefits. And of course, if we think, and of course, we need to keep in mind that until now, food production areas have been valued just because of the food they produce, or mostly because of the food they produce, right? But for instance, if by changing the way we crop, we make our croplands, for instance, carbon sinks, then we can start selling carbon credits, right? Then we can, if we rethink the agricultural subsidies, rather than focusing so much on production, if farmers get credits for the biodiversity their fields keep, right? Credits or subsidized, rather than getting subsidized for throwing away food, if they get subsidized for the amount of biodiversity they keep in their fields, right? So there are many ways that we could make this work. And this is something, of course, worth discussing. And of course, we need to, I'd like to say, to unleash the power of young people and research. There is still lots of, you need to engage, the new generation, not only the general population, but the new generation of scientists, of young scientists working in these fields, because there are still many, many discoveries to be done, and there are lots of research that needs to be done in order to all these ideas that I have been, throwing away here in a relatively vague way to make them a reality. And I would like to close, by using this quote, of Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, which is very true. We depend on land for our survival. I like to say we are not birds. We live on the ground. We don't fly, right? We don't live on the sea. But if you think seriously, without land, we could not live, right? But we treat it like dirt. And of course, now is the moment to start, changing our priorities. Land should be at the center. Land and food production, because I mentioned before, food production is the most extensive use of land we do at the global scale. So we really need to put land for production at the center of all the environmental, economical, political, and social debates if we want to achieve the sustainability of our planet, and if we want to achieve the sustainability of drylands, and by doing so, to achieve the sustainability of our planet. And that's it. I think, I have been shorter than I expected. So there is plenty of time for questions, which is good. So I hope that at least I will have been able to transmit the message that I wanted to give at the beginning, and I will be more than happy to answer any question you may have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Fernando. Thank you very much indeed. Now it's time for you. Who is the first person who is going to make the first question? Yeah, Vicky.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I need to put my glasses because if not, I will not be able to see you.
Hi, very nice talk. Thank you very much. I wanted to, in your talk, you have showing us all these problems, all these challenges that one can feel somehow hopeless. But I wanted to ask you, in your knowledge, if you know of, because this is a global problem, but still, do you know of any country that is doing the good steps in that sense that you are thinking of in a way to give us hope for the future?
Yeah, thanks a lot, thanks a lot. It's a very pertinent question because I think it's important. We need hope, right? Because if we will feel hopeless, we will do nothing, right? So yeah, I have to say there are initiatives in the right direction all over the place. You know, of course, if you think countries are very complex, right? So within a given country, it's very difficult that everyone aligns in the same way, but everywhere there are, you know, like lots of initiatives that are going in the right direction regarding food waste, regarding the use of a less intensive agriculture, protecting biodiversity and so on. So yeah, there are thousands of initiatives, and you know, the problem is particularly right now, is difficult because all the geopolitical tensions, the wars going on, and it seems that now it's like more difficult to agree to each other because many of the measures that should be implemented require a global approach, right? It doesn't make sense if a country does it and others don't, right? And right now, as we can see, it's quite difficult to get like broad agreements, right? And even when these agreements are made, are difficult to implement. We can see it's very difficult to control climate change, even if everyone has signed that, you know, all the countries typically sign all the agreements, right? But the implementation is more difficult. But yeah, there are many initiatives, you know. Here in Spain, for instance, I don't know, you know, the Common Land Foundation, there are multiple farms, for instance, there is one in Murcia, another in Almeria, another, I can't remember the name, I don't know if it's maybe Albacete, where they are starting to manage, you know, in very dry environments, you know, between 200 and 300 millimeters of rain, they are starting to manage, you know, the area in the land and the way that the crops they grow in using this less intensive way, and they are seeing the results. There are also very interesting initiatives in Catalonia about food waste reduction, you know, and food waste program now, and I think this is something that we should are very proud. Spain just passed, you know, this, I guess you may be familiar with La Ley de, I don't know the name, it's la cadena alimentaria y desperdicio. So now Spain has allowed, you know, that, for instance, Carrefour, all these big companies need to specify, first, how much food they are wasting, right? And second, they need to have clear plans by law about how they are going to reduce it, you know. And for instance, the law is promoting human consumption, for instance, donating to food banks. And this is something in Spain, this law is very good. Now we need to implement. You know, one of the problems of Spain or many countries, the laws are very nice, but then what is difficult is the implementation, right? So yeah, there are, I'm optimistic because, you know, we have identified the problems are well identified. The solutions are well identified too. You know, we need is to apply them. And of course, it's clear that they need to be applied. The governments need to, you know, be on top of this, because if we leave this to the market, right, it will not happen. But, and I will stop because we could be talking for hours. But the short answer is yes. There's lots of initiatives going all over the world, and in particular regarding food waste, you know, Spain is being a pioneer because now we have a national law that still it was approved last month, no, 2 months ago. So it needs to be implemented, but I'm optimistic that in 4 or 5 years, the amount of food waste being thrown away in Spain is going to reduce dramatically, right? But of course, and you are working and doing research on this field, we need to move away from the mantra, right? Of we need to produce more food. It's not the case, or not everywhere at least, you know, because we are throwing away lots of the food, and you know this better than me, right? So, and I know this is not a very popular message, right, among, you know, different audiences, but that's the reality. These are the numbers. It's not something that we are making up, right, for giving a message.
Hi, Fernando. Thanks for this fascinating talk.
Thanks.
And my question is somehow related. So how you think the global communication in terms that you can send food from here to Australia is contributing to this waste of food and therefore waste of water? And the opposite question, how can we use this global communication to fight the increase of desertification?
Yeah, of course, thanks. That's a very, very important question because, for instance, here in Spain, you know, and of course, and for me now being in Saudi Arabia is being quite illuminating, right? Because of course, here in Spain, we can talk about, you know, local food production, right? Here you grow a lot of food, so you can get local food production. But in Saudi Arabia, more than 80% of the food is imported. If you are in Patagonia, most of the food is imported, right? So, you know, and of course, it's a complex, but if you do a complete life cycle assessment, for some crops, it's better, you know, to move, to ship from far away than to produce locally, right? And because, of course, it's nice to grow mangoes and aguacates here in Malaga, but we know what this has brought, right? That we are running out of water here, and eventually, you know, this is creating other problems. So it needs to be, there is not like this is a complex question that cannot be answered by a simple, you know, it depends. Depends on the country and depends on the crop, right? What of course we really can, and of course this is driven by markets, right? If now all of a sudden in Spain everyone wants to have an aguacate in the morning, that's a disaster. We never had, when I was a child, I didn't know what an aguacate was, right? And now it seems that everyone needs to have guacamole every night in the toast, right? So this is one thing. We really need to be conscious about the impacts of our decisions regarding the food we eat, and we need to be very very well aware of the impacts. For instance, I come from Alicante. You know, when I was a child, I never had an orange in the summer because this is out of the season. But now people want to have a watermelon in December. Come on, of course. If you want a watermelon in December, they need to come from Brazil, right, or from the global south. So this is the main problem, is that markets are now, I don't know if we have been falling in a trap, that now we have a need of having all sorts of fruits all year long, right? And this is what is driving most of these impacts. So on the one hand, we need to start coming back to a more seasonal way of, you know, eating food, particularly fruits and vegetables. And on the other hand, we need to keep in mind that some areas of the world need to bring food from many other places, right? And of course, every time that you ship things from Australia to Saudi Arabia, you are going to lose something. And in these cases is where we need more research and better, you know, facilities in order to minimize the food that is being wasted, right? But, you know, sometimes, and there are again many studies, it's not so much, we don't need to agonize, right? Because sometimes the problem is, now I going to the market is stressful because I'm gonna have a guacamole. Oh no, this, you know, we are depleting the aquifers in Malaga. Oh, I want to have this. No, this is coming from far away, you know. But for instance, there are more simple choices. Of course, it's better to have an aguacate than to have a beef, a hamburger, right? You know, for instance, from the greenhouse and from the water perspective, right? Particularly when this beef may come from Argentina or from other places. But to me, what is fundamental is that I think, and this is all important, but for me the most important is the food waste, and at the origin, and that's something that people don't know, and you know this better than me. Not all tomatoes that are grown on the plants are equal, but you go to the supermarket and all the tomatoes are equal. How many tomatoes are being discarded because of cosmetic reasons, right? So for instance, this is something that, and I think the Spanish law is trying to change this. So, okay, so now, if you have food that is not nice to the eyes, you can sell it at a discounted price. If you have these tomatoes half price, people will buy them, right? And it will be a win-win. It will be good for the people because you use less money, and make fresh food more affordable, because that's another problem, is that all this junk food, it's cheaper going to McDonald's and get a hamburger than going to supermarket and buying a kilogram of tomatoes, right? So, yeah, I think that I'm not answering properly your question, but it's you can see it's a very, very, very complex issue. So, trying to answer it so local is not always better. It works in some areas, but we need to keep in mind that in some others, you know, just with local food. If we are in Saudi Arabia, we all need to rely on local food. Of course, we are very close to the Red Sea. We can eat fish every day, and dates, lots of dates. But fish, dates, and camel milk, which is not very tasty, right? So, you know, this will not work in our modern societies, right?
Thank you.
Thank you for the inspiring talk. Well, you gave us a kind of a guideline of what we can do, right? But where will you start? Because in my opinion, I think education and making governments aware of, well, everything that you have been explaining would be the most important. Because right now, for example, I would love to have a elephant farm to increase the biodiversity in the soils in my farm, but I think it's not feasible. So what would be the first and the most important point to start?
Thanks a lot. Of course, we cannot bring elephants here to Spain, right? So, yeah, well, we could, but of course, it's not something we should, right? So let's say, for me, the most important, education is important, but education alone will not work. You know, and I'm sorry, and I have been involved in outreaching education activities all my life, all my career, but this will not work. An example is recycling. You know, no matter how many educational campaigns, how many ads, how many TV campaigns, whatever, it's not working. So we need laws. This is the most important thing. Do you want to avoid food waste at the gate? Change the subsidies, and automatically people will start throwing away the food. That's very simple. That, of course, you know, agricultural policy drives what people plant. What is plant? You know, what are the crops being planted? Mostly those crops, as you know, this is a big problem. So many in areas I have seen when I was in Madrid, I saw lots of corn in the south of Madrid being irrigated, and people don't even collect the corn just because it was enough for them to get in the subsidies. So the most important, in my opinion, is regulation. You put a law, and allow with the correct incentives, right? And people will start to change. For instance, I remember some years ago, I used to spend 6 summers working in Germany. And I spent 3 summers in Berlin and 3 summers in Leipzig. If you don't know Leipzig, I would recommend. Beautiful city. Lots, you know, lovely place. And I went one day to the supermarket, and that was, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years ago, when the prices of the watermelons in Spain were very high. You know, I remember 1.80, close to 2 euros per kilogram of a watermelon. Which, you know, everyone was like a national debate. And then I went to Leipzig, and I say, you know, an offer, Spanian, 0.76. How is possible that a watermelon that is being grown in Murcia, Almería, or Alicante is shipped to Leipzig, and it's cheaper in Leipzig than in Alicante? And so why is that the case? Because, of course, there are lots of externalities that we are not in food that we are not paying. We are not paying for the recycling of the packaging. We are not paying for the CO2 emissions, right? And we are not paying for many of these things. If now, by law, we need to start paying, we have to start paying, right, for those things. Are we paying for the depletion of the aquifers? Nobody's paying for that. Some people are benefiting, are getting lots of money, but nobody's paying for the, you know, which water are our kids and or children and grandchildren gonna have if we now deplete all the aquifers, right? So, and what's the way of, you know, making people aware of this? By law, by taxes. You know, by if you put a tax on this, then people quickly appreciate, oh no, this is the real cost, right? Or maybe rather than getting a watermelon in Leipzig, it's better to have another thing, right? Or make the German people pay the real cost of depleting the aquifers in Spain, right? Because at the end, to get cheap watermelons for the Germans, we are running out of water, right? So education is important, but the most important thing is legislation. So we really need governments, and I think the current Spanish government is very well aware of this, and are making big steps in the same direction. But again, I mentioned before, traditionally in Spain, we had the Ministry of Agriculture, which is very powerful, and then the environment. Now it's a minister. For many years, we didn't have a minister. And there has been a continuous clash because, and we can see it right now, right? When all these, you know, political parties talking about turning down the 2030 agenda that is bad for the farmers and so on. It's not bad for the farmers. This is the way to go for the farmers. So we need to align. So we have seen food production and environment as incompatible things. And it's not that they are not incompatible. They are compatible, and the only way for agriculture to have a future is to is to align with, with the environment. So the only way to do this, not the only way, but the most efficient way and fastest way of doing it is by legislation. Now in Valencia, many people are become aware of, no, if my field is with cover crops, you know, I don't lose the soil. This research is known since the 90s. There were already lots of studies done in the 80s and 90s in the Valencia region knowing this. So we know this. But now, okay, do we need to wait to another dana to people become aware of this, right? What's the way of speeding up the process? By legislation, right? Is if now I give you a subsidy for you to keep your cover crops and for increasing the soil, and if you can demonstrate that you are increasing the soil, you know, a given % through time, then you can get a payment, right? Rather than getting a payment for producing more. Because by increasing soil carbon in your farm, you are giving lots of benefits for the whole society, right? So education is important, don't get me wrong. We need to still, you know, educate people, we need to educate our children, we need to educate our peers, or families, or neighbors, or politicians, but education by itself will not go far away. We need legislation. And even with legislation, we can see right now under the current political situation how difficult, right? And because what is written in law can be changed. So, you know, we really need to push forward for having a strong legislation that is being implemented on practice.
I have almost a politics question. This country is a country full of laws, because making laws is easy. I mean, I can make, it's full of implementation. The problem is when you need a law that can be implemented. And I have the feeling, and I have the sensation, that a lot of those laws are not taking in consideration that they can be implemented. It's more a tool for the politician to be saw on the television, on the radio, and to make politics. So I think the scientist has to play a role on that, has to play a role putting some kind of sensation or logic in the whole thing. Because, for example, the law that you were mentioning about the food waste, which I think is a problem, I'm absolutely sure. I'm not absolutely sure that it could be implemented. It seems to me like impartially, basically a politician movement. It's important that the scientist goes and tell the society the good things and bad things about those laws. So what is your feeling? Do you think there's only making laws, or is more important to make laws that can be implemented? Taking into consideration implement a law is a very difficult thing. It's not as simple as we're going to, if you're going to save some food or limited the waste of food, you're going to have wonderful conditions. But then the agriculture, the people, the farmers want to grow food, and they want to grow to sell it to high pressure, high price, and if they can't, you know, so it's a very complicated. So what is your feeling? It's only making laws what will serve as a part of education?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. That's for your question and comments are very, very pertinent, and I'm with you, you know, and you know, many of the laws, particularly this law, may not fully implemented in practice. But I think this will not, first, and in my experience, and correct me, or I can be completely wrong. We have a very limited capacity to reach society, you know. And I'm sorry, because I know this is not a popular message, but you know, for instance, which are the countries in the world with the most advanced science system and with the most advanced, you know, translation system, right? The US and the UK, right? And the US, you work in agriculture, you have this fantastic, you know, translational system. The USDA had a full department to translate the science to farmers, you know, very advanced, amazing. This has not stopped the current government, right? In the UK, having the UK system didn't stop having someone like Boris Johnson going to power and do what they did, right? So I'm a little bit pessimistic about our capacity to influence, you know, policy and to influence people. We can do a lot, but I think we can do in practice, our capacity to reach and to change things is lower than we think, because first, still society see science as something very abstract. Oh, it's very important. Well, it's not important at all. If science will be important in Spain, what will be the funding for science? Much higher than the current funding of science, because a way of, look, now military is important. The government increased the spending, overnight. Well, if science is so important, we should increase the funding, right? But anyway, this is my personal view. I can be completely wrong. Going back to your question. To me, what the key part for implementing the law is also, and of course it's complex too, is that the law needs to have very, very clear, and I don't like to say this word, it's not a nice word, punishment. Let's say one of the problems that we have today is that, for instance, for farmers that steal water, it's cheaper to pay the fines than to continue stealing. There is no incentives for them for doing the things right, because I don't mind. If they don't cut me, I will get a lot of benefit. But if they caught me, I will continue getting benefit. I pay the fine. But let's say if they caught you, and the fine is 1 million euros, you go to jail, and then it's really, really a big punishment, then people will think twice. This is one of the problems. The problem is that the implementation, sometimes the fines, let's say Carrefour, you need to have this plan. If you don't fulfill this plan, you will have 100 million fine, right? Make sure that Carrefour will implement the plan, right? But if at the end they may get, 20,000 euro fine, they don't care, It's nice, no? It's nice, as you say, it will be a very nice for making an ad, for making some social media post, but it will have no real value. So I agree with you. The most important, and this country has a wonderful laws that are not being implemented. The most important is implementing them. But in order to implement properly them, people that don't follow the law need to be punished accordingly, right? Because we are talking about something very important, which is water. And without water, there is no life. Without rain, there is no life. And it's not the life now. We need to worry about the life for our children and for grandchildren. What is happening is gonna to deplete aquifers. People say, no, desalination water. Okay, that's fine. Of course, in Malaga, in Alicante, there will be no problem. You can put a pipe 20, 30 kilometers. But who is gonna pay for a pipe 300 kilometers inland? Are the farmers in Castilla-La Mancha or in Madrid gonna pay for desalination water in Malaga or in Alicante? Who is gonna pay? Of course, they want no. All will have to pay. Well, why we all have to pay for you to make money, right? So things are very complex. But to me, still, I firmly believe that even if it's very difficult to get a real implementation, we need to focus on the law, because without the law, there is nothing. And maybe you are very more successful than me trying to convince farmers. I have been not very successful at all in Spain. And you can imagine in Alicante, this is a very sensitive topic, and everything that you talk about the reducing, irrigation, stopping or reducing the Tajo Segura transfer is a very, very sensitive topic. I'm sure here in Malaga the same, right? And the only way to this is through laws and the implementation of the law. And this is the job of politicians and the job of judges, right? This is their job, If they don't do their job, well, our society doesn't work well, right? We can help, and I think the government most governments are very keen to have advisory panels, right? Right now, for the first time in Spain, we have a science advisory panel in the Congreso, right? And I think they are steps in the right direction. How influential we can be, I still have some reservations that, we need good laws and good implementation. I fully agree with you.
But what I'm trying to say is maybe the scientist has to realize that they have to be more involved in politics.
That's true. I agree with you. And we need to be more proactive, because all the laws, all of them, are open to public comments. How many comments by scientists receive how many suggestions? How many scientists have read the law, right? Because sometimes we complain, people don't pay attention to us. Of course, there will be never a politician here in this room, or very difficult. We need to go to where the politicians are to give the message. If we are proactive, then we should not complain. But I completely with you. We can really do much more than we are doing right now, advising, because at the end, and I had quite a few meetings with politicians. We are public servants, right? Well, now I'm no longer. I now moved to Saudi Arabia. But all of you in this room, and I was a public servant when I was working in Spain, we are all public employees, right? We are public servants. We are here to serve the country, like politicians. So where we complain, politicians don't use us. It's true. They use us nothing or very little. But we can do more, you know, showing them that we can be helpful and we can help. But of course, for doing that, we need to spend time. We need to worry about those things rather than worrying so much about the next paper or the next conference, right? And this also, and I think the system, this is another debate, right? Whether the rewards for scientists should change and value more this job, because it's very difficult. And I agree with you, there should be more. If you go to the Congress, 90% of parliamentarios come from business or law schools. How many scientists are in Congress? Look at the ministers. How many scientists are there? Well, scientists, people with a science degree. Very few. And of course, then we complain, but laws are made by lawyers, economists, and people more from other fields that they may or may not understand, you know, how we work and how we can help them. But the way to address this, I think, is for us to be more proactive.
Yeah. So in short, it would be necessary education, science, legislation, and punishment.
It's not a nice word, punishment. It's like
fines.
implementation. We can say implementation of the legislation.
Yeah, the thing is that you said scientists, we find the solutions or the problems, and we suggest solutions. And this is a very globalized problem. We can propose globalized solutions, but how to implement in every place in the planet has its own problems. So if the solutions come from scientific suggestions or proposals to implement in each place of the planet different solutions, is going to be very difficult. We all agree that the planet, you show it without any doubt, there are many, many problems in common, but everywhere in the planet. But to implement different solutions everywhere is going to be very difficult, don't you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But I really like this sentence of think globally, act locally, right? And that's something that is true, you know. And now, for instance, again, coming back to this, it looks like a mantra, but it's true. For me, being in Saudi Arabia has opened my eyes, because sometimes no. We have a very Eurocentric view of the world, right? We think it's difficult for us to think that the world is not like, you know, the world is very different. You know, there are many cultures, many way of operating, many way of, you know, thinking, many way of managing the land, many ways of farming and so on. And there are, as you mentioned, these very, very global and common problems, but there are, the solutions need to be applied locally, right? And of course, when apply local solutions, we need to, you know, in some places, top-down solutions work relatively well, but in some others are a disaster. So we need to go bottom-up. And of course, the application need always to involve, you know, knowing the realities of the ground at the local scale. But for instance, in a country like Spain, of course, the north of the south is very different because the climate is different, but many of the at least for over 75% of Spain is a dryland. So, you know, for at least 70% of the country, you know, you could apply, you know, solutions in Alicante are the same as solutions in Malaga, and likely the same as solution in Guadalajara or Albacete, right? So, you know, still at the national, of course, then is the way that the political system is organized. Here, of course, the comunidades autónomas don't facilitate getting everything like, you know, harmonized, right? But that's why we have the national government. But in some countries, for instance, in Africa, you know, they don't work because they are tribal societies. So you need to apply solutions from the, you know, from the ground, from the bottom up.
Yeah. More questions? No. So thank you very much again, Fernando.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Outstanding talk. Very, very stimulating. And well, next time you are again invited to come here and explain your particular experiments and projects and so on.
We'll be happy to do that.
Very clearly, Fernando is an opinion creator or proposer, right? So he, as you can see, he's quite committed with society, And yesterday we had a very, very nice talk about how committed he is with the Arabian Saudis society. And now I would like to ask...
Dance by the water beneath the Mexican sky. Drink some margaritas by a string of blue lights. Listen to the mariachi play at midnight. Are you with me?